Hi, I'm Regan Robinson, your host of Future Fit, the only podcast unraveling the secrets of how the world's most innovative leaders stay future ready in a fast-paced world. I've spent over 20 years as a futurist and strategist, transforming top global brands and putting investment-backed startups on paths to sustainable growth. Along the way, I've become obsessed with new ways to prepare for the future, because thinking about the long term once a year simply isn't enough. In each episode, I talk with movers, shakers, and path breakers who share their stories about how they turn uncertainty into their strategic advantage. Throughout our journey, we'll discover unconventional and imaginative ways to help you thrive today while leading your teams into tomorrow. Future Fit leaders know that being prepared for what's next is more than a business decision. It's a way of being. Let's venture together as we co-create a new future readiness playbook. The future can't wait, and neither can I. So, are you ready to get future fit? Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Eugenia Blackstone, an accomplished marketing and digital transformation expert with a track record of building successful brands and businesses. Eugenia is renowned for her expertise in developing marketing, brand awareness, and media strategies for international businesses, and is the Chief Marketing Officer for Iris, powered by Generali, an award-winning global identity and cyber protection company owned by the 190-year-old multinational insurance company, Generali. With a client roster that includes leading brands like MasterCard, Geico, and Vodafone, Iris offers always available identity resolution experts and tech-forward solutions that uncomplicate the protection process. Eugenia was recently named to 2024 Forbes Entrepreneurial CMO 50 list, where she was recognized for increasing both relevancy and access to the tools Iris provides for the enterprises they serve and the hundreds of millions of consumers served in turn. Eugenia is also on the board of the NVMS Conflict Resolution Center, a nonprofit organization that helps provide workplace mediation and conflict management support for both businesses and individuals in the Virginia State area. Because Eugenia is on the forefront of driving business transformation and change, I'm incredibly excited to hear what she has to share with us today. And with that, welcome to the show, Eugenia.
Thank you. That introduction, I sound so cool.
Well, you are cool. So let's begin our conversation with a question that I pose to all of my guests. And that is, what does future ready mean to you?
Future ready. I would say future ready really means plan, always be planning, but don't get planted. Don't get so firm and locked down in what you're planning for that you lose the ability to take a look around, you observe what's happening and be ready to pivot and change, because the future is just that, it's change. And so if you start planning today, what you think the future will be, whether it's a month from now or 5 years from now, it's going to be different in some way. Hopefully it's not radically different than what you've intended, but sometimes it is. If you think about things that have happened, COVID even radically changed the plans and expectations that people had and how they needed to be prepared, for example. And AI is doing that to a lot of things right now. And so I think it's about really preparing yourself, being observant and just seeing what's out there, but then also not getting so stuck on the plans that you've made that you are like, I know this is not going to work anymore, but I really want it to, so I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm going to force it. I'm going to shove it. I'm going to make it work, because it won't. And being nimble. So just plan, but don't get planted.
I was just going to repeat that. I'm like, I love that soundbite. Plan, but not planted, because I think it really underscores an important point, which is, I always tell people the future is a place where anything can be different, even things that seem impossible to change today. And thinking about the future and spending time in the future is really, it's about anticipation. It's not about prediction. Nobody can predict the future. If someone tells you they can predict the future, run. Right?
Yeah.
That's actually not true. And that's actually not the exercise or the capability that is really important, I think, in modern leadership. It's more about this to your point, your adaptability. And I think the other thing that you said is really insightful is the observation component, right?
Mhm.
Of future readiness. You have to really move through the world in a way that is listening and open and observing, because that's how you're going to pick up on signals and cues that others aren't even seeing. And those tend to be the secret sauce to future
Yeah,
readiness.
exactly. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's more of a mindset thing than anything.
Absolutely. So related to that, now I know you have an appreciation for reading and art and travel and immersing yourself in different cultures, whether through literature, travel, or food, or exposure to different ways of life can dramatically widen your thinking patterns. And this can stimulate your brain to think in really unconventional ways that help you more effortlessly and effectively think about the future. So what are some ways that you get your mind ready, speaking of mindsets, your mind ready for future oriented and imaginative thinking?
I think it's a few things. Number one, I try to make time and space, and I have to be very intentional about this for just quiet sometimes. It is
Mhm.
really the ability to just have a little bit of peace and allow all the things that I've taken in over the past days, weeks, months, whatever, to really marinate in my brain and see what thoughts come to mind. And I think our brains, I haven't done no studies in this area, but I know that I get some of the best ideas in the middle of the night, or I can't sleep in the middle of the night, or it's finally when my brain has had the opportunity to quiet down, when some of those best thoughts or ideas come to my mind. I'm in the middle of a shower, and so I'm just not zoning out. And so I think setting aside that kind of time is really, really important for us. I'll talk in a moment about all the intake, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't really say that even with all of that intake, the ideas don't necessarily come immediately or things don't necessarily click immediately. It's not until later that I remember back to something and go, oh, that would be really cool, or that makes sense, or something like
Yeah.
that.
And what you're experiencing is backed by science. So we know through cognitive science and neuroscience, this is one of my favorite things to share with people, that in order for you to harness your imagination, which an imagination is the ability to see what does not exist and to connect, you start connecting dots between
Mhm.
things. But you actually have to be in a rest and digest state versus a fight or flight. So your nervous system has to be in a very specific mode in
Mhm.
order for you to imagine and start doing exactly what you described. So what you're experiencing is a real phenomena and that happens in our brains.
Yes. So I am definitely experiencing that. I think as far as this kind of like the intake part of it, for me, it's interesting. I have toddlers, and a lot of it now comes from seeing the world more in the way in which they see it. The amount of questions that I get from my kids has made me question more things, like just
Mhm.
random question. What is that thing? What does that mean? Is that possible? And I think that ability to question and not to antagonize or to poke, but with genuine curiosity to just question things also just opens you up. And I think that's one of the reasons why things like travel and reading and things like that really stimulate that, because you're coming from a place of curiosity. You don't know what's going to be on the next page of the book. You don't know what the next chapter is going to be about. When you go to travel, you're in
Mhm.
a lot of times in a new foreign place. And so you're seeing that world in a very curious way so that you are able to just, I wonder what that thing is. Nothing feels like a stupid question to me, really, when you're traveling. When you go to a completely random place,
That's a really
you
good
don't
point.
feel uncomfortable, yeah, about saying, what is that thing? Or why does it look like that? Or whatever the case may be. So I think it's about staying in this space of where you're questioning. And I personally draw inspiration from outside of our industry for sure, but all over the place. There is really no place that's off limits to me when it comes to where I look for inspiration or ideas from. So I think as it relates to travels, the other thing I will say as it relates to travels, I am not by nature the most patient person in the world. I'll put that out there. But
Noted.
traveling forces you to have a certain level of patience that does not come quite naturally to me. So I think the whole process of traveling makes me slow down a lot more. And in an effort
Mhm.
to not be annoyed about that, I've become very intentional about trying to embrace that additional time and the slower pace and
Yeah.
just slowing down again allows me to be a lot more observant of things and take things in. And so I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but those are the ones that jump out at me.
Yeah, that I love all of that. And I think the childlike wonder is really important. The curiosity and really just, I think an important takeaway is not being afraid to ask questions. Like they're really walking through the world with this idea that there is no stupid question. Like I'm an insanely curious person. I actually looked up your name and like the meaning of your name. They were like, so I'm incredibly curious and asking what's possible, like you said, your children do, or what if questions are really important to really open your eyes to what's possible. And then again, that slowing down component is really important so that your brain can process, so that it can have some space. And then your imagination starts kicking into gear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love that. So now one of your specialties as a chief marketing officer is identifying new market opportunities. Mm-hmm. And identifying opportunities and being future ready are all about being ahead of the curve. So they both require a dynamic approach to strategy, embracing innovation, maintaining an agile, learning-oriented mindset that can swiftly respond to changes in the market. And so I'm curious, how are you spotting and making sense of new and emerging opportunities? And how are you using those insights to keep Iris ahead of the curve?
Yeah. So I think this is a really important one for us. I'll start with the organization just a little bit first and then move to myself personally. But we have been doing identity protection. Our 20-year anniversary is actually this year. And if you think back 20 years, nobody was talking about data breaches. Not the average consumer knew anything about what a data breach was. So
no,
we were certainly ahead of the curve, even when we entered into the space, just thinking about as there is more the digitalization and in smart homes and Internet of Things and the internet itself and just all of this smartphones and all of this transformation that's happening in other areas, what are the downstream effects of that? Of social media becoming much more popular and being invented, even what are the downstream effects of people sharing and sometimes oversharing and so much data and information being out there. And so I think I have had the luxury of being with this business where they provide really the space and the opportunity to be forward thinking and forward looking, because that's really how the business was born from that perspective. And a lot of times when people ask me about how do you do that particularly from a work perspective, it's really important that the business creates the space for that. Going back to what I was saying earlier, it's one thing to say, we are innovative or we want to be innovative. And I struggle with that word a lot of times, but
me too.
Because
likewise.
Innovation is not one of those things where you're like, we're going to be innovative tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. Innovation is a lot more about how do I create the right processes? How do I create the right culture within my organization? I would say innovation, it really is a lot more of a cultural thing than it is really a business thing. And so I think it's a lot more about creating a culture in an organization where people aren't scared to be wrong. When you talk about how I do that, I myself, and I also make sure I extend this to my team, it is okay to take risks. It is okay to fail. We just want to fail fast, learn from it as much as we can so that we're not failing in the same way the next time. But that's how you get better. That's how you discover the thing. Nobody really gets to an innovative place the first time, right? It is that iterative process, exactly, of saying, all right, because I'm always thinking now in this mindset, and because I'm in an environment where that is nurtured and it's embraced and it's normalized and it feels good, and then I'm not ostracized or made to feel crazy or like a failure when I fail. Now I can continue to work in that space. This is a weird analogy that just popped in my head, but from a basketball perspective, they talk about 3-point shooters in particular, and how if you're shooting a lot of threes and you start to miss, if you have the wrong coach, it's like they want to sit you out or you get down on yourself and you don't want to shoot threes anymore. But if you are the team's 3-point shooter, the best ones are the ones that are embraced to keep shooting the shot. Like even when you're cold, keep shooting the shot. You'll warm up, you'll get there. That is how we get to the Steph Currys of the world. And so I think, and that has transformed the game of basketball. And so I think similarly, and I'm not even a huge basketball person, but I know enough to know that, but I liken that to businesses, organizations, individuals who consider themselves something like innovative. I don't know what the word should be, but that want to see transformation happen. That's the mindset that you have to be in. You have to say, even when it didn't go right the first time, that's not going to make me be afraid to not try again in the future. And so it's a process of having the opportunity, the space to continue to just try and try again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said so many important things. It's a mindset. It's a process. It's a culture. Like you, I have a bone to pick with the word innovation, and it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And that's okay. I'm an abundance mindset person. There's space for all of us, but I do think that it is overused. But once you understand how to wield it appropriately, it's very powerful. And one thing I think that people forget too, in terms of innovation, to your point of it being a mindset, there's a lot of different ways that you can explore uncharted territories, right? To stay ahead of the curve. So one of them is reverse innovation. So instead of just looking forward, look backward and outward. And you can look at historical data or cross-disciplinary studies to look for patterns that might be disregarded as irrelevant or outdated, because then that often surfaces hidden opportunities that can be adapted to modern context. So what comes up for me is you said basketball. Well, one of my favorite little business cases to share is, so Nike introduced their Flyknit technology in 2012, and they used reverse innovation, which involved digitally knitting the entire upper part of the shoe into one piece, which actually reduced labor and material waste significantly. And the inspiration came from historical practices like sewing and knitting, which are ancient techniques of making clothes and other textiles with minimal waste. And so by automating these processes, Nike actually revolutionized shoe manufacturing, which resulted in lighter footwear, substantially less production and waste, and showed how ancient techniques can be adapted using modern tech to really revolutionize industries. And so I think there's just so many ways that people forget how to look at innovation and where to look for it and how to create the space, as you were saying.
Yeah. And I would be, in hindsight, I left another piece out because I don't want anybody to hear what I'm saying and think I'm saying innovation in the process of potential failure in that is aimlessly guessing. No, that's not my message. My message is there has to be, yes, some level of education that you're doing, knowledge seeking that you're going out and finding. For us, a lot of times that is getting as close to the market as we possibly can, getting to the consumer and really finding out, or getting to, we're a B2B2C, so getting to the right person at that business organization and really understanding what their pain points are. And is there a way that our current solution can help solve that? And if not, are we close enough to something else in the market, adjacent to it, complementary to it, that we can develop something that also helps to solve that kind of problem? And so, again, I go back to the 3-point analogy. If you're not practicing shooting threes, then yeah, the coach is going to sit you out. But if you're practicing and you're just having a rough night, then yeah, push through, keep. And so I think I say all that to say, to your point, yeah, you look back at what has historically worked, look forward, look around you in other markets. Like I said, I look outside of our industry quite frequently to say, where else might something like this make sense? What other problems are people solving? And if you go back to the history of the ownership of our company, we started out as a travel assistance company, and our mission to this day is still taking customers from distress to relief. And so it really started from a travel assistance place, but then again, looking out into the space, saying, what other areas are really distressing to consumers right now that we can help them in? And what areas are going to become potentially more distressing where a solution currently doesn't exist? And that's how we get to identity protection. And so I think it's that sort of thing. If you get to the core of why you're doing what you're doing, you
your purpose, your real purpose.
Exactly, your real purpose. You'll find that there's a lot of ways to interpret your ability to live out that purpose to help other people.
Yeah, that's a brilliant framework. And I can see how it works in a lot of different ways for your company, but I think that's important for people to keep in mind. Is like, all right, well, I know what my purpose is. How can I deliver that in a new context? And guess what? That is innovation. So let's dive into business transformation a little bit more. Business transformation and future readiness go hand in hand because they both involve things like adapting and thriving in an ever-changing internal environment, an ever-changing external environment. They both require long-term visioning, big changes in company culture. Speaking of company culture, now, according to McKinsey, this isn't going to shock you, but 70% of transformation projects fail. So as you and I both know, this work is not for the faint of heart. So as someone who, you're like, as someone who drives business transformation at your company, I'm curious, what are some key factors that ensure your transformation efforts not only succeed in the short term, but also truly future ready, Iris? And what wisdom could you offer for leaders struggling with balancing this sort of short-term and long-term issue?
Yeah. So I think like the foundations for almost everything, communication is a huge piece of it. And I say that from a number of different perspectives. I think the difference between transformation success and transformation failure often like starts from a perspective of communication. It is how you are explaining what sort of transformation is happening with the business to other stakeholders in the organization, employees in the organization, how that information is being communicated, and what sense of assuredness or comfort that you're giving to the folks inside of your organization. And depending on how large your company is, that may be more or less of an undertaking. Depending on how drastic the transformation is, that may be more or less of an undertaking. But at some level, having some level of communication is going to be really important. And actually, even as you're going through figuring out what that transformation is going to be, really being able, because it's not something that is done in a silo, right? So I work very closely with our chief technology officer. I've worked very closely with our chief revenue officer, with our CEO. These are all conversations related to how the business is transforming. All of that communication has to happen. We all need to be in lockstep first, and then it is cascaded out. But I think if the reasons why this sometimes fails is because it's this top down approach and it is, all right, here is how we're changing. And if that's not clearly understood, bought into, and communicated to everybody throughout the organization and everybody throughout the organization, that's where it can start to fail because people don't understand it. They start to question things. Yeah, exactly. It just resists. And people naturally don't like change. It just is I'm sure there's something scientific to that too, that it's just in who we are. And I think over time, it's one of these things that becomes a muscle. Had to change. I've been a part of things that have had to change so much that I am less resistant to it. But there's a small part of people like their routine, right? They like knowing what's next. And so I think not being able to properly communicate that is something that's often overlooked or underestimated, the importance of how that transformation is going to actually roll out successfully. So I think that communication is going to be a big piece of that. Outside of that, I also think that it's really important for once that is communicated and there's a conversation, a real honest conversation that needs to happen sometimes around transformation, because a lot of times, ourselves included, businesses have to have that conversation of if we don't change, we will die. We're not going to survive. And a lot of businesses don't want to have that realization. They don't want to have that honest conversation with themselves. And then they find themselves wishing it away or just sticking their head in the sand. And then 10 years later, they're no longer in business. We all can think of names of companies that this has happened to, brands that at one point in time, we never thought it would happen to. Fun fact, I was going through some very, very old purses a couple of weeks ago and came across my Blockbuster card.
Although, double fun fact, there is still a Blockbuster open in Bend, Oregon.
Is it?
Yes, we were interviewing another person and it came up and I got so curious after the interview.
I should not have thrown my card away.
I called, no joke, I called up to make sure that they were still in business. So this is curiosity.
Yeah. So I digress. But anyway, we can think of a number of different companies this happened to. And so I think a key part of transformation starts with first being honest and being honest with your employees. Hey, I know you love the way things have been. I know that, but in order for us to survive and to be sustainable and to last into the future, we have to be able to transform and evolve, because that's how we stick around. And there has to be conversations that are had about how do we keep to your point, what our mission is, the core, the essence of who we are, and not discard that when we have to evolve and change, but still shed the things that no longer make sense anymore as we move into a new space. And so I think if you're unable to have those honest conversations, and again, that's connected to proper communication, all of those things, but really have that reality, look in the mirror and say, this is not going to last anymore, or this is not working, or the writing's on the wall, and we can't simply hope that the tide turns. We have to start to do something about that. And so I think that is often a rough and uncomfortable conversation, but the sooner you have it and start to plan for it and prepare, the better off you'll be. And I know for us, a lot of that we had to at some point sit around the table and have a conversation and say, the concept even of identity protection is changing to consumers. Their availability, what's available to them as far as being able to check their credit score and their credit report, the number of data breaches and breach fatigue, that all is impacting how consumers are viewing this space. So what are we going to do? How are we going to change to be able to make sure that we're still here 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now to be able to service the true need? Because at the end of the day, the identity theft and fraud is not going away. So the problem's not going away. We just need to be more innovative, and there's that word again, but more thoughtful and intentional and future thinking about how we address and solve that problem.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. There was so many good points in there. And coming from someone who's working for a company who has been around for over 100 years, which I think there's 0.001%, or it's low to have made it that long. That advice holds some weight. Having difficult conversations, communicating, that in and of itself takes time. And I just wonder too, if leaders also forget about, no, we actually need to include that as we think about how we're planning this effort, maintaining that communication. Because so another word I have a sort of a bugaboo, if you will, with is the word balance. Forget balance, think rhythm, right? Transformation it's not like a static balance to achieve. It's more of a dynamic rhythm to maintain. And the rhythm between the short-term demands and the long-term vision should almost be like breathing. Right. Where both are essential. Doing only one isn't an option. And so maybe mapping over your communication cadence and intensity to more of a rhythm versus a balance. That might be a more tenable recipe that people can use.
Yeah. And that's a very good point too, because depending on how quickly the transformation needs to happen, there are tough decisions sometimes that need to be made. And you may have to say, you know what? For this particular period of time, everybody needs all hands on deck, focus on building the plane, right? So we don't have time to get on the speaker and explain to everybody what's happening, but you have to be mindful that once the plane is built, like we can't forget about that piece. Like we can't not come back to that. And so I think it really is about, sometimes you have to take a step back and look at the entire plan and say, all right, if we can't do it here, it's just making sure we don't lose sight of it. And where do we move it to a place that works and makes sense? And we can really dedicate because sometimes too, it happens, but it's not given the same level of care that the actual it's separate from the transformation. Oh, the transformation is over here. And then how we talk about it, and this is the marketer in me, right? That is part of the plan. You can't separate the two out and say transformation's over here, and then we're going to explain it to people over here. No. You know what I mean? And because the space in between those two things, particularly within the walls of an organization, is where people start to come up with their own narrative. And it's usually not the narrative that you want, or the narrative
or even the right one.
Exactly. Right. It's not the right narrative. That is a big thing for me, is that has to be a part of the plan, not like an afterthought. And so
it's not a bolt on. It's not and that's where I think, to your point earlier about creating safe spaces, psychologically safe spaces, is even more important, because if you're telling people, all right, hey, we're going to build the plane, I'm not going to get on the thing and explain it to you yet, but hang in there. We haven't forgotten you. We're not going to get you on this plane without explaining like what went into it. We're not going to ask you to risk your life in that way. So just hang in there. No, I think those are all really important points. So I want to dive into sort of fear and change a little bit more. So you recently told Forbes, and I love this, that I'm going to paraphrase you here, that being different is not safe and it requires change, and change usually causes fear, and fear causes people to focus on a multitude of obstacles or reasons why we shouldn't change. Now, overcoming fear, as we've been talking about, is a crucial part of the change process, and it is my personal belief that fear and ego are getting in the way of companies being future ready. So now you're 4 years into your role as CMO, and you are removing obstacles, and you're guiding and building a team adept at navigating changes across your brand, your positioning, your product. So how do you navigate the challenges and fears associated with change at Iris? And what advice do you have for leaders looking to do the same?
Yeah, for me personally, a lot of it is to look back before looking forward. And I say that in the sense that I have been through a lot of change. I started my career at Caterpillar. During my 5 years there, I lived in 5 different places. And so just the structure of that required me to constantly be almost 5 different jobs in the 5 years that I was there. And so I think starting my career out in a place where it was nothing but change allowed me to just adapt in a way that just like was forced on me. And so I think knowing that each time I came out of it okay, or I was able to take something away from it, or I learned something from it, or I was better off from it, that is the mindset that I go into any change now with. Now, I'm not going to say it's always rainbows and butterflies and I hear, oh, this change is happening, or I'm a part of some conversations about change that need to happen. And I go, great, let's do it. No, but I give myself a set of period of time, whether sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 2 days, and I ruminate and all right, I liked it how it was. But then I just have that moment with myself where it's like, all right. And I think some of it is just my personality type too. Roll up my sleeves and now let's get it done. It is what it is. And I've been through this enough times before to know that there is something better on the other side of it. And I do it now. As it's like Nike, just do it. Right. And so it's not great in the form of advice, but literally, it is just that. I feel like the longer you sit in it and think about it and ruminate over it, that is where you start to convince yourselves of that's where the fear heightens. It kicks in even more. It's like, I don't have many fears. I'm not afraid of public speaking, obviously talking or anything like that. But I know the longer you wait in something like, okay, I'm going to stay. I had to learn how to swim in high school. I had a traumatizing swimming incident as a child. And I remember, but I had to pass swim to graduate high school. So I had to take swim, tried everything I could to get out of it, but could not. And the day one of the parts of the final exam is to jump off the diving board, swim a full lap of the pool and lap back. And in preparation for that, I found that the longer I stood up there on that diving board, the more likely, because there were a lot of days where I was like, yep, it ain't happening today.
Not gonna do it. Yep.
The longer you stand up there and start to just take in all the fear, the harder it becomes to make the jump. And so at some point, the quicker that it all happens is almost the better. Don't give yourself enough time. And I don't say that to mean don't think about what you're doing, but particularly if you're a person in an organization and you're not in charge of that change, especially somebody else is telling you, hey, this is happening, get on board or not, but this is happening. It's best to embrace it as quickly as possible. Find the reasons why you like it and you will enjoy it and jump. Just jump. Don't stand there forever trying to. And so I think that is, again, I don't know if it's the most sage wisdom, but it is what I found works for me. I just have to have that pep talk with myself, that moment. And in a lot of cases, change breeds change. And so because I've done it enough times, it happens even quicker the next time. And I have past experiences now where I'm able to say that went really well. Had I not done it or been super resistant to it or whatever, I wouldn't have got that. And so now I just move through.
Here's the thing. There's a reason my show is called Fit, right? Future Fit, because my provocation, it is a level of fitness. Future readiness, change is just like exercising, mental health, fitness. I have a big provocation around this. And so what you're sharing with me is, I think, really important for people to understand. The more you bump up against change, the more practice that you have with it, the more you just do it, it becomes much easier because you are like me, where change for me is so, like when people tell me change is hard, the first thing in my head is you're not trying.
Yeah. Yep.
So you're being lazy. Like you need to get out there and bump up against a bunch of change. And once you keep bumping up against it all the time, it becomes
It
almost
becomes
effortless. And
normal.
to your
Yeah.
point, you may need, if it's a really big change or something you totally weren't expecting, yeah, take a minute with yourself or whomever and process it, but then jump.
Hmm.
I love that. As the marketing landscape evolves quickly, driven by changes in tech and consumer behavior and global trends, and this constant flux makes it difficult to anticipate the future and create steadfast long-term strategies. And while to my point earlier, many people look for quick fixes and easy solutions, the reality is that true leadership means having the courage to do hard things, right? Especially when it comes to a company's future readiness. And so what gaps or difficulties are you facing when crafting long-term strategies that are essential for building Iris's future trajectory? And what wisdom would you offer for leaders who are struggling with the very same challenges?
Yeah. I think sometimes when you're looking out, especially if it's 5+ years, say, into the future, the further out you're looking, sometimes where you need to get to or where you're trying to be, and
Mm-hmm.
it feels like you're so far from it right now because you can't see exactly the steps of how you're going to get there. You abandon the goal, right? Or you say, we'll never be able to get there. And I think for myself personally and for our organization, a lot of it is about saying, all right, that's still going to be the goal. We can't see all the way to the goal. We don't have the exact roadmap there yet. So we just need to start taking the steps. How far can we get? What do we know now? What do we
Mm-hmm.
have? And we can have a separate team or do work on the side to figure out from where we know we can get to where we actually need to be. That work can be happening concurrently to figure out how we need to get there. And sometimes the world will do that work for you, right? If you're talking 5, 10 years out, 2 years from now, there could be some technology that exists then that doesn't exist now, or it's more scalable
Right.
or more affordable, or whatever the case may be, that wasn't even felt like a potential thing that you could leverage or use, and now you can. And so but
Yeah.
if you had completely abandoned that as the goal because 3, 4 years before you couldn't see that as the viable way to get there, you failed to a degree. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a lot of it, the advice that I would give is even if you can't completely see all the way there, and this is what I say, what I meant going back to where we originally started about not getting planted. It's okay if you can't figure out exactly, because however the 10, 15, 30 steps that you think you're going to have to take to get there, that's not going to be them anyway.
No.
Something's going to happen, something's going to change, something, you know what I mean? Like it's not going to, so at that part, I don't want to say it doesn't even matter. Yeah, it matters, but it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter all that much. It's as you inch closer to that. So I say bite it down into smaller bite-sized chunks. Don't take on the whole thing. Start to figure out
Yeah.
how you get there. Don't just say, because I can't see the entire vision, that I'm just, forget it, that doesn't make sense, or we can't do that.
Yeah. What's coming up for me too, that's I think really important is remember our biases, recency bias, confirmation bias. Like we
Nice, for
get
sure.
so in love with our ideas and like of how this is how it's going to be. Right. And so the more that you can not fall in love with the specifics, but more of the journey, that you're on, and the easier it is to embrace when things shift and change, because as we know, they're always going to shift and change. And one of my takeaways from our conversation today is really leaning into the discomfort of the uncertainty, encouraging your team to explore wild ideas, training them to think like disruptors, giving them the freedom to fail.
Mm-hmm.
To your point earlier, the future belongs to the bold, not the cautious. Ask
Mm-hmm.
lots of questions. I think all of this is really marvelous advice. So before I bring us to a close, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think I really appreciate the opportunity for being able to come and talk to your audience, for people to care what I have to to say. But I think particularly in the space of marketing as a CMO, it's really important that our part of our responsibility is to make sure that kind of that brand story or that brand narrative is really true throughout the entire piece of the business. And I think that is why it's so important when we talk about being future ready and marketing sits at the output of that, right? So whatever it is that we're attempting to be or where we're trying to get to, at some point, marketing is going to need to communicate that to an audience. So we need to be involved in that process. We need to understand it. We need to be, again, immersed in that so that we can tell the right story, so that we can communicate it in a way that even the most technical thing evokes some emotion. It evokes some connection with the person on the other end that we're trying to persuade or convince that this is the thing for you, whatever that thing may be. And so I think I would just close by saying, for any organization out there that wants to position themselves as being future ready and, again, innovative and all, really embrace your marketing arm within your organization and bring them as close to that process and include them in as much of that as you possibly can, because it'll only serve you well in the end to do that.
Wise words. Now, a final question before you share where listeners can find out more about you. So in your view, is preparing for the future more about managing risks or capitalizing on opportunities?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I'm going to go with capitalizing opportunities, though. I think risk will always be there.
Right.
So there's some element of managing a risk that will need to happen, but risk will always be there. The funny thing about opportunity is it usually is in these windows, right? So you have a limited window to grasp onto it to get it. So I'm going to go with opportunity.
Love that. And with that, where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
People can find me on LinkedIn, Eugenia Blackstone. People can find out about Iris at Iris Powered by Generali or irisidentityprotection.com. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and your brilliant insights, Eugenia. It's been enlightening and fun. And I've learned so much today, and I've had so much fun exploring with you.
Thank you. Same.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Fit. If you're listening, you're probably future curious. So follow me in my newsletter on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going and share your discoveries with the Future Fit community. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, rate, and review Future Fit on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.